doctrine disciple of the progeny. But so prior to this, you were living in Hollywood. You were working in Hollywood. Your sister is Sandra Bullock. You were working together. Yep. How did you get from there to Vermont, living in a farmhouse, teaching baking?
I'm lucky. Well, baking was always my passion, and I essentially put myself through a school for myself and my poor husband had to eat everything because no one in LA ate carbs, so this was an issue, and so he was like, "We got to get out of here to people who eat carbs, so I don't have to eat all of this." It was just my passion, and I went to law school, and I did very adulting things, and my mom got sick, and she died, and I took care of her while she was dying, and I thought, life is way too short because she was incredibly healthy, marathon runner. I was like, okay, so this is a sign that I should pursue the thing that I love, which is baking. And as it turns out, teaching baking is my great love because I feel like I'm also giving. Sometimes heart attacks based on how much butter's in there. But I'm kind of giving this knowledge and kind of giving back because my mother gave so much to me. So I like to give back through the baking.
So did your mom, was cooking a big part of your house when you were growing up?
She was a fantastic baker during the holidays, but other than that, we were vegan. We were macrobiotic growing up. But I did not know that what she did was hide marzipan candies for herself, like really high. This is why I'm so tall. Something in me said, you must grow to find the candy. And so she had this, obviously a sweet tooth that I inherited, so does my dad. But we grew up incredibly healthy, and I felt very deprived. So this is what happens right here. When you grow up in that kind of household, you become a pastry chef.
And you said that teaching, like beyond baking, but the teaching of the baking is really what you love. What is it about the teaching that you love?
I love I love telling people what to do. That's one thing. But I love communicating my joy and passion for baking, obviously, and showing people that it's not so hard. So cooking, people often say, I can cook, but I don't bake because it's too hard. And I find it terribly meditative. Have you heard of procrastinating? There's a thing in the New York Times. It's a real thing. It's better than yoga. I can't touch my toes, but I can make a kick-ass sourdough bread. And I find that whole process is so meditative. And if I can show someone how to just relax into it and teach them some techniques so that they don't feel so fearful, I feel like I've given them something that's life-altering and kind of like a stress reducer.
And so I'm not a baker. I can follow directions, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. What's like the first thing that you teach someone when they're kind of being introduced to the world of baking?
So oftentimes when you start baking, you just read the directions, and it's a very visual medium. So you read something that says, cream the butter and sugar until light and fluffy. What does that mean? Unless you see exactly what it means, most of the people I know that are kind of rudimentary bakers don't know what that means because they actually haven't seen it, because reading in the recipe doesn't mean it. So that's one of the things that, just, go online, watch my show. I will show you. It is a very visual medium, and people feel like they're the failures, but it's literally one of those times where it's not you, it's them. So there are ways, if you can see it visually, then you can be less fearful and jump in.
I like that. I can. Visual is good.
Yeah,
visual is good. And you said you're also self-taught. So do you remember kind of the first baking triumph that you had?
Well, it was first a failure. I was making croissant, and I thought I did everything right, and then I realized that the butter in the croissant was not causing it to steam and rise, but was just puddling like a lake. And it was a lesson in a couple things, that ovens lie. They are big fat liars. So are thermometers in general. And I figured out very quickly that sometimes you can do everything right, but your equipment can be horrible. And I realized just bumping up the temperature 50 degrees, that same dough behaved entirely differently. And that was a triumph in that it saves me every day, because I always have an oven thermometer in my bag. Because if I'm traveling and baking, I'm going to be checking that lying oven right away.
And what would you say is your favorite thing to bake?
I am not monogamous when it comes to pastry. I love everything. I'm a swinger when it comes to pastry. but it also depends on the season. And, it's based on what I'm teaching too. So my favorite thing like this weekend will be patterned Swiss rolls where you can put really intricate patterns on the outside of a cake, and it's incredibly simple. And then seeing the looks on my students' faces when I do it, they're like, this is not happening. What you did, I will not achieve. And by the end of it, it's like they're all Instagramming it to death. They're like, this is so great. I'm like, I told you. So it's like, it's just whatever's making people happy that I've taught them is my favorite thing to bake.
I love that. And when you first got to Vermont, I believe you had a pastry shop. Is that right?
We did.
And were you teaching then as well, or was it full time with the store? Or?
I was teaching at King Arthur Flour, but not very often. They have a baking education center in Vermont, and so like a couple times a year, I would teach there, and then at Stonewall Kitchen in Maine. And my husband, over the years, he saw me teaching a little over a year ago. My husband, Ray, hi Ray, walked in on a class, and after the class, he said, "You have to do this all the time." And so he really spearheaded opening this school next to our house. So, and he now has to do the dishes on the weekend. So whenever he complains, I'm like, "You invented this. You are to blame for this."
And so when you started, is that when you closed when the shop closed, when you started teaching full time?
No, I wrote a book on baking, and then I started concentrating on writing to teach. So I was writing a lot of cookbooks, and then I actually enjoyed the physical aspect of teaching as well. So now I do both. Now I get to sleep, which you don't get to do when you have a pastry shop.
I can imagine there's a lot of midnight pastry making.
Yeah, you wake up at 3 a.m.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And how does teaching sort of lend itself to television?
Well, I think my mode of teaching and making it accessible and fun and silly was immediately translated because I felt I could see the people who were watching, and knowing that if I can do what I do in a class and make people laugh and not feel intimidated, if I can look ridiculous, then they're not going to feel so ridiculous doing something they think is very hard. And so that's half my battle, is just saying this is just a joy to do, and the result is tasty, so why not?
To put on your baker teacher hat for a second, are there any rules in your kitchen that people must follow?
Don't use salted butter. Oh. Don't use store-bought pie crusts. If you do, don't tell me. And that's pretty much it. My rule would also go to don't use box mix cakes. On the other hand, if you're doing that rather than buying a cake made at the grocery store, there is something in you that's telling you you're a baker. You have this need to go through that process. And so I'm like, I can take you and you can do something just as easily and even better, because you clearly have the baker within you.
And I have to ask, why no salted butter?
I can usually I call it butter funk. It's like when something is made with salted butter because it's a preservative and it's usually sitting around collecting all the detritus from around it. But also, bakers are anal retentive and persnickety, and no one is going to tell us how much salt to put in there other than what our recipe says. So you don't know how much salt is in that butter, and if a recipe calls for another addition of salt, that's just confusion that you don't need. So unsalted, always better. Be precise in your salt, and be anal retentive.
Salt precision, I like it.
Precision.
And then, so you said you always have an oven timer in your bag. Are there other items, kitchen items, that might be unexpected that you're like, you need this if you're gonna succeed?
I think everybody loves macarons now. It's a thing because they're so delicious. But one of the techniques that are used for making macaron is a heated sugar mixture. And you need a very precise temperature for that. And most thermometers, like ovens, lie. Getting a calibrated thermometer that tells you, because you'll cry otherwise. They won't turn out like the pictures that you see. So having a really good thermometer, and there's one specific one from England that is also a good meat thermometer. Just wash it in between your tasks. But that's calibrated to like 0.001 degree. And that's an instrument that will save you with meats and sweets. I just invented a new show, Meats and Sweets. No one can take it.
We'll be watching that. And then, so for some reason, I again, not a baker, but I have this philosophy that I can make cookies.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. Am I right? Is that like the best first baking experience?
It is a great first baking experience because, you know, when you read that cream, the butter, and sugar, well, with a cookie, you don't have to do it to like such a fluffy degree. It's a little more forgiving. And you can be a little more gentle with it, and you can do it all in a. You don't have to have a mixing, like a special mixer. So yes, but I think with all kinds of baking, having patience and being gentle with the ingredients, unless you got a knead, and then you got to be rough. But other than that, be gentle with the ingredients.
And then just a few more questions before we take it to the audience. But so summer is almost here.
Yeah.
What are some flavors of summer that we should be incorporating into our kitchens and baked goods?
I mean, the obvious are berries. I mean, they're berry schmerry. What I love, and if you live in a city like this where you can get them, I grow them because I'm weird, currants. So they are so tart, and like mixing them with just a little bit of sugar, to me, I grew up part-time. My mother was German, so black currant, red currant is such a big flavor in Germany that to me it really speaks of summer. And they're great when you can do like a lovely fruit tart with pastry cream on the inside that's really, really sweet, and having that tart berry on top is just gorgeous.
I've seen a lot of clips of you baking, and often you kind of call upon these flavors of Germany of your childhood. What other flavors come to mind when you think of, you know, your mother baking or your grandmother baking?
Well, marzipan is a huge one. Anything with almond extract, chocolate, obviously. But I mean, I'm the two things. My father's from Alabama, my mother's from Germany, so I've got the full like. I will do the bacon and the, you know, processed cheese food happiness. And then I will do, you know, I really like all foods. And I love to mix the two. Like I will do a strudel dough and I'll put pimento cheese in it and do a little cigar with the melty pimento cheese and the flaky strudel dough. And it's fantastic. And it's like, it's truly it's a signature me thing to do. But people usually don't get to eat it because I end up eating it all first. Sorry.
And I believe you have a new book coming out this fall. Is that correct?
Yes, it's called Fantastical Cakes. Wait for it. It's all about cakes. And it's about my approach to this is people, you know, you see all these gorgeous cakes and very smooth sides, yada, yada, yada. I give you all like people have tricks. We have tricks that we like to hold back so we appear more special and magical. I will tell you what those tricks are to get all that fancy looking kind of cake stuff down, and you don't have to tell anybody else. You can just have it for yourself, but it's all in the book.
My last question before we take it to the audience is just what is your favorite thing about what you do?
Aside from the fact when I was a kid, I was like, my fantasy, I was like, people would say, like, where are you going to live or what kind of house are you going to live in? And I always knew, which actually isn't true anymore, that I would live in the witch's house in Hansel and Gretel because it was made of cookies and candy. Yeah. I thought, I didn't think about like ants or like, you know, the stuff that it would attract. But I mean, I'm truly living a childhood dream. And so what's interesting is that I'm now, as my husband would say, I don't always get high on my own supply. Usually I bake for a purpose for someone else, but the fact that it gives me the most joy and that this is my job and I'm actually good. I mean, sometimes it really stinks when you love to do something, you're not very good at it. I'm like, I got myself really good at this. I really trained myself so that I would get good at it, and I still adore it.
That's awesome, and I'm starving, and I'm sure we have questions here, so.
Is there like a dream person that you would want to cook a meal for?
Tina Fey, I would love to, because she and her night cheese make me very happy. She has a thing for sandwiches like I do. I think I could make her fantasy meal.
Hi.
Hi.
What advice would you give to somebody who wants to start baking but isn't much of a cooker?
Ooh, I think that would be perfect if you're not like, because they're so different in a way that you just start practicing. Start on like an easy recipe. I have some really good ones for you. And like, go watch the show, go on YouTube. Like, there are people baking online all the time, so you can actually see the process. Like, Food Network has a whole channel dedicated to crazy people making cakes. So, you know, you can watch it and just play with it, and don't be down on yourself if it doesn't turn out. You know, I find that mistakes actually make for the best lessons, and they're usually pretty tasty too. So just practice and look for the thing that you are craving and get good at making it.
And one final question.
Hi. I've been to Vermont a few times for skiing and eaten brunch near the resorts. But
We're there for the beer.
beer too.
Admit it.
Yeah. Do you go out to eat at all, or do you prefer to stay at home and cook? And if you do go out, are there any places that you recommend or that you like a lot in Vermont?
We do go out. We are lucky where we live in that we, did I tell you I like beer and cheese and butter? No, we live very close to Simon Pierce. If you've ever heard of it, they're glass blowers, and we don't eat the glass. They actually have a fantastic restaurant, and they really focus on local Vermont things. And then there's some Woodstock, Vermont. Have you heard of that? It's like one of the prettiest towns in all of the world. And they've got great restaurants, so you can be in this beautiful setting and eat fantastic food and cheese and beer and butter. And I love to be out and about in Vermont eating all the time.
Sounds amazing. Well, Gesine, thank you so much for joining us, and check out Baked in Vermont on the Food Network.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.